Okay, are we good back there? Okay, I am calling this regular meeting of Town of Gibsons Council to order at 3:35 p.m. now due to some technical difficulties. This is a meeting of October 8th, 2024, and we're honored to gather on the traditional territories of the Squamish Nation. First item is to approve the agenda. We did have a delegation that has canceled, so I don't know if that might shift things around for other logistics here. I know we wanted to have the Billy's Walk. We wanted that up front because of Katie, I thought. So it wasn't early enough for her, even when we put it further up the agenda. Damn. Okay. Sorry. I don't know. Isn't it something to talk about when the item comes up? Apparently, no. I'm being kind of told about this past the last second here. Okay, I don't know.
Billy's Walk is the first thing.
And anyone can just approve the agenda. Councillor Kroll. Okay, seconded by Councillor Thompson. All those in favor? The motion carries. We have special council meeting minutes of October 24th, 2024 to adopt. Moved by Councillor Kroll, seconded by Councillor Thompson. All those in favor? The motion carries. And in business arising from those minutes, we did have some follow-up discussion. I think we largely acknowledged that there was quite an informative report on the impact of the residential guest accommodation approach of the last year, last couple of years, and that we would need to have a dedicated working session to that in the future, which we'll work on scheduling. But in the meantime, I think it was also recognized by a number of councillors that there is an inconsistency in how business licenses are being charged that we could just address immediately, which I think would be in the public interest. And this proposed wording could address it, but I'd like to suggest something else that means the same thing, but it just might be clearer and might be just clearer to the public. And that be that residential guest accommodation, business license fees, and clear of our intent too. Business license fees be consistently and fairly aligned so that rooms within a home and rooms being shared for a limited term of 3 months and under be eligible for a $200 business license, and all other self-contained units be eligible for a $2,000 business license. Does that captures the two different?
That works, I understand that.
Yeah, okay. Does that make sense to? Because I feel like out of context of a lot of other things, this other wording we're putting here doesn't really, might not make sense to a lot of people. You need me to repeat? I've got it written down here. I'll send it to you later. Yeah, okay. Does that make sense to? Okay, moved by Councillor Lumley, seconded by Councillor Kroll. Any discussion? All those in favor? The motion carries. And bylaw number 1065-81-81, Billy's Walk. And this is where I might need some help because I don't have my internet's not connecting here for some reason. So we've got options on page 9 to 10 of the staff report, which someone else can probably call up better than I can. But I'll go to staff to introduce this.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have a presentation here that has a bunch of renderings of the redesign of Billy's Walk that I could share. Thank you. Okay, so in this report, it goes over the zoning amendment for second reading and the form and character development permit. So just to remind council, it's the application is on these 4 properties that will be consolidated into one parcel if the rezoning is approved. This is a site plan just showing what was there before. So there were 5 buildings with the walkway going through, or the pedestrian route through the center. So 5 buildings, 5 separate buildings totaling up to 49 residential units. And building C in the middle on the top there was intended to be a rental building with 17 rental apartment units. Now this is the after picture, and I've annotated it just hopefully to bring some clarity to it. But there have been 4 key changes in the proposal. And the changes are in light of comments from the Committee of the Whole, the Advisory Design Panel, Infrastructure Services, and the Gibsons Landing Heritage Society. So the 4 key changes are, one in purple on the left there. There will be a 3-meter road dedication along the east side of North Fletcher Road to widen the road from 8 meters to 11 meters. And this allows for some pedestrian and cycle facilities on that side of the road. The second change is to building B and C. So they used to be 2 separate buildings, and what's happened here is they've both been consolidated into one building. And the consolidation allows the opportunity to save this arbutus tree right there. And then in yellow, an additional public elevator. So right there, there's an elevator that would be available to the public that brings you down, up or down, so that there is accessibility through the site. And then the 4th is the green line that I've drawn through here. And what this is, it's an additional pedestrian access, a connection from South Fletcher that would go all the way through the site and down to Seaview Road. So connecting South Fletcher to Seaview. And then building B and C would still have the 17 rental units, but there would also be 12 strata units in that building. This is a section just to show what the South Fletcher section would look like. So right here, this is the original property line, and what they're offering to do is give a 3-meter road dedication to widen that road. Here's a view from Gibsons Way looking west. So you're looking up towards the entrance of Building A on the left and Building B on the right. Building A has been refined based on the ADP's comments, and Building A has basically stayed the same. Oh, sorry. Is that correct? Building A has been refined. Yeah, and Building B is the same. Okay, so here's the view from Gibsons Way looking southwest. Building B and C are combined to provide space to retain the arbutus tree and extend the new path from South Fletcher to Seaview Road. The architectural character from Building C has been maintained, and the red and green higher trees are on the consolidated property. So these trees are on the property. They're planted in the side yard, which has been increased from 4 feet to 10 feet. So the building has been moved back a bit. The combined buildings have been articulated to maintain the unique character of the red building B and the white rental building C. And then there's the forest green building recessed between the two so that it looks like there's different buildings, but it's all one consolidated building. So this is looking north, up from the Stonehurst Properties deck, or the guest terrace. So this is looking up towards Building A, and it shows that the massing steps back from Gibsons Way. Here's a view from the pathway from South Fletcher side. The path extends to the proposed elevator, providing accessibility to North Fletcher and to Lower Billy's Walk. So on the left is the covered outdoor children's play area, and on the right is the rental building. This is looking east towards the development, level from North Fletcher Road. You can walk between buildings D and E. There's also a bridge to the public elevator providing access to the path and to Billy's Walk below. And then this is up above, walking towards the elevator with views down to the preserved arbutus tree. Building C massing steps back at the 4th floor on the lower side and is 2 stories in height on the upper side. So from the arbutus tree side, it's 2 stories. From the lower side, it's 4. These are the views from Upper Billy's Walk to the little park below, where Building A is 2 stories in building height. And then this is on North Fletcher, looking east towards Keats Island in the back. Building D has been moved back 3 meters for the North Fletcher road widening. The building height is the same. It's intended to show small-scale building massing. So both buildings have been moved back to adjust for that road dedication. Building E is 1.2 meters from the new property line along North Fletcher Road. So these setbacks have been reflected in the zone, which is amended. So this table shows the original bylaw that council gave first reading to, not the whole thing, but parts of it. And so that's the first column. The second column shows what's been amended. And this is to reflect the 3-meter wide roadening and the new setbacks. And then the third part is the density. So because the road dedication was given, the property size got smaller and that increased the density. So there's a minimum base density of 80 units per hectare instead of what used to be 75. So there's 2 options in this report for council's consideration. Option 1 is to proceed with the proposal, and option 2 is to reject the proposal. Under option 1, there's A and B, so that's to give the bylaw second reading and to give to authorize the issuance of the development permit subject to the adoption of the zoning. And then the optional pieces there are to ask the developer to hold a public information meeting, to give the bylaw third reading. And then that third part was as a result from conversations around the speed limit on Gibsons Way. So if this development does go through, then the recommendation there is to reduce the speed limit from 50 to 30 kilometers per hour. And the developers are here in the room to answer any questions that may come up. Thank you.
CV Road, okay. So CV Road is not currently 30? Okay, I thought it was.
South of Seaview.
South of Seaview, okay. Oh, on Gibsons Way, south of Seaview, okay.
That lower portion of Gibsons
Right.
Way towards the bus stop.
Right. Okay. So questions for staff or the developer? Councillor Kroll?
Through you, Mayor White. In the sort of report from infrastructure, it mentioned an upgrading for the water main on Gibsons Way. I'm just wondering, is this cost that would be recovered in DCCs, or would the scope of the project be larger than what the DCCs would capture?
Sorry, can you ask that question again?
In the infrastructure report, and I do realize that the Director of Infrastructure isn't with us at the moment, so it might be something that you could just report back. But there's mention that the water main on Gibsons Way would need to be replaced to support this project, and I'm just wondering if the cost of that would be recovered through DCCs, or the scope of the project is larger than the recoverable DCCs.
I'm not totally sure how much would be cost recoverable, but typically the developer would pay for their portion of any increase in water main size. But I would defer to the Director of Infrastructure to answer that.
We'll have to wait until he's here well, I'm sure he'll be at another meeting where this is being discussed. Councillor Lumley.
Thank you. Through the mayor, you know what? My memory's not as good as it used to be, and it's getting worse. But the arbutus tree, like the combining of the two buildings for to save the arbutus tree. I just had a couple questions. I don't remember if there was an arborist report, or I know there was concern when we built the supportive housing unit and wanting to save those trees, which they originally wanted to get rid of. I'm just not sure. I didn't know if there was an arborist report, the life of the arbutus tree. Like, obviously, combining the two buildings increases the massing. Like my preferred would be the two buildings split. But that was one of my questions, was that I'm just having trouble recalling any discussion with respect to the tree and so
You're
on.
completely correct on this. I was surprised by this as well. I believe it was, and this is something we keep coming up against, is I believe it was a letter that came in from the Heritage Association saying that it was important to them to preserve the arbutus tree. I don't think we necessarily, as you're very correct, Councillor Lumley, we hadn't had a chance to kind of explore this and set it where, to where our priorities were. Is this the most important thing for the community? It might be. I mean, I haven't had I've seen that arbutus tree from a distance. I recognize it has value. It'd be definitely nice to be able to keep it. But, is it something that, like when it comes to trade-offs and things, is it something that was our highest priority? No, we'd never reached that point. So you're correct in identifying that. So I think this is a good question for the developer. Where did this, mostly the representative of the developer, is in combining the two buildings, where's the impetus for that? Where did it come from?
The developer is here as well. This is one of the partners with his wife, Sandeep and Sukhri. Yeah, okay. So it is kind of combined with the awareness that a connection could be made between South Thretscher pathway to Seaview. And that came out of, I was aware of it, okay? And I made Leslie and Staats aware of it and said, I don't know if this is something that Gibsons want, but I was expecting that you would want it because it's really the walkable village. And the response that I got back from the planning department is that council would support that and would see how that would benefit the municipality. So this has a lot to do with topography and grading, like how high. If you look at the elevator actually has 3 stops. It has the lower level is the Billy's Walk, which is now at 8%, which is basically like a accessible ramp, you know what I mean? Like it's wheelchair accessible all the way up to the elevator. And then from the elevator, 1 story up, we're talking 5 meters here, 1 story or 1 stop up brings you to the green line, which connects from South Thretscher theoretically to Seaview. I say it theoretically because building BC has been moved back and it has now a 10 feet setback to the property line. And there is an expectation that the developer who may one day, or the owners of lot 18, that maybe one day they would like to redevelop as well, and that the town would want to proceed. At the moment, if the trees are not planted, and if this would take time, then there's 10 feet available to make that walkable connection. But I think for cycling, it should really be 20 feet. So then where you see the arbutus tree, that is actually at the existing elevation. So to make the pathway and to keep it as level as possible from South Fletcher all the way to the arbutus tree, we're not totally level, but we're mostly level. That's the idea, right? And so the tree, to make the pathway, you have to keep the grade, and the tree sits right there. And yes, I received that letter from Diane Robinson, and although she at the end mentioned that she would only proceed with making comments on the heritage aspect of Stonehurst, but that has always stayed in my mind that somehow it's true that, you know, if we can retain the tree, we would. So here's the report, and the report is from Hartwood, and it's dated December 11, 2023. And so there are kind of there are three trees that are noted as being significant, you know, and the significant trees are the two that we retain in a little park there, the two fir trees, or the two coniferous trees, and the maple is right there. And if you look at the tree, and if you go there, you recognize that it's an absolutely amazing tree. And seeing that both of these things could happen combined, you know, with the accessibility over 3 levels and with connections in 2 locations, it's almost, the elevator is almost like a little train station. You can actually transfer from any level to the other, 3 different levels in different directions. So the report is here. The reason why we didn't do that originally is that, and I realized that later, that the report was written a little bit as if there were 4 separate lots, because it said that normally in the buildable area, you can remove trees because that would stop anybody from being able to develop, right? So then in the report, it says that it was encouraged to retain those trees, but it wasn't really necessary. At the time, we just tried to get small scale buildings. So we wanted to do 5 buildings. Now, if you look at the space that you see, that little indentation there between B and C, you see that kind of in the front facade, that is almost the same dimension as the building separate. So if you look at the building separate, and we have Jerry here, this is good in high tech as this fellow there. And so, but anyway, what I'm saying is that we can easily pull it up if Leslie Ann doesn't have it instantly available. And then you can actually see that the building B and C are taking unnecessarily up more space. We had to make them more compact as well, so they share some facilities. Like for instance, now we can have 2 elevators in these 2 buildings, so we can kind of compress it a little bit. But for the rest, it was our intention to keep the same speed and the same aesthetic and small scale. And you can see that clearly in the 3D rendering. So we really focused on making.
We're going to have a lot more questions, I bet. Yeah, I know there's people lining up, so you don't have to try to answer them all at once. We'll give you some more. I've got Councillor Thompson next.
Thank you for that, though. It's great to see the road widening section there on North Fletcher, because that was a concern. So it's nice to see that extra 3 meters. Can you confirm for me that there's no actually increase in the building heights in this new drawing, please?
Yeah, so the heights are the same from building D and E, basically from all of them, all the buildings.
Councillor Kroll.
Thank you, Mayor White. This I'll direct to Mr. DeVries. With the amount of the site that is being covered by non-permeable surfaces, and the fact that you have gone to great lengths to put in parks and preserve trees, is there any intention to have any form of water capture that could be used for irrigation as opposed to using potable water?
Yeah, so let me start with the roof. So as you probably are aware, there's two buildings with the flat roofs that are intended to have green roofs for aesthetics, but also for water management. And our office is really familiar with water management, and all our projects, we do all kinds of forms of water management, either in slow release tanks or in kind of like call them septic fields. They're very similar. So that would be done through a civil engineer.
Councillor DeAndrade.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I was really impressed with the change. I'm always amazed what architecture can do. I think the connection with Stonehurst is way nicer. Everything was nicer, and I appreciate actually the preservation of the tree and the whole active transportation, because it made this area greener, more organic, less cement. Even though it was pretty, but there was a lot of cement heavy, I felt, and now it's really smooth. I also appreciate the setback. I was concerned with the small setback with the other lot on the north. I think this was a really great move. And yeah, Mayor, I would like to move option 1 and some of the option that a public information meeting be held by the developer, and that staff be directed to decrease the speed limit on Gibsons Road.
I do have a couple questions on the rental. Yeah, I think we were, do others still have questions too? Okay. Well, I don't, I'll just ask one more question and we'll get to a motion maybe, if that would work. So on the rental building, so we're looking at it, it's right now, and this might be a question for, I'll go to our staff actually, and then maybe staff could defer to the developer and representatives if need be. So right now we're looking at 17 rental, and 12 of those would be strata. But I think, you know, there's hope, I think, to try to provide accommodation for the people who have been renting on that. And I don't know if that still, now, most of those people are in single, small apartments. And I think there was talk earlier, and I don't see the breakdown right up in front of me, of having some of those apartments be as large as like 3-bedroom or, so that's a change. Could we just kind of run through what the latest is on that proposal? And then there was also, I think, with the larger number of buildings, I think there was a phasing plan earlier on that the boarding house would be left standing while the rental building would be built so that people could move in. Is that still possible? I'll go to.
I can answer the question about the community amenity offer. So 17 rental units, and 4 of those rental units would be below market, is what the offer is. Originally, it was 3 units below market, so they've increased it to 4 units below market, and those 4 units would be studio units. But I'll pass it on to the architect to answer the phasing question and any more on the CAC.
Well, maybe about the process, because the developer has committed to, first of all, leave the existing building for. Sorry.
I guess another, underlying all this is parking, because the whole request was depending on parking too, right? So just where, sorry, I didn't explicitly mention that, but that's what we all know about too, right? Is what, the 17 units was dependent on less parking, right? So
Yes.
Where are we with the parking versus units? Okay, thanks.
Okay, but the how this would go in the mind of what the developer has promised is that, first of all, the boarding house would not be torn down before it's needed for construction. That's one. Then 2, they would first try to find a single-family home that could be used by the 4 boarders, if that's what they prefer. If they don't prefer that, then they would look for accommodation, just, rental places in Gibsons, and they would pay the difference between what they pay now and what they would have to pay for more expensive rental. And then, of course, when the building is finished, these 4 studio apartments are really quite nice, and they're much larger than the small rooms that they occupy now.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Kroll?
Thank you, Mayor White. In the options proposed to us, item E, that staff be directed to decrease the speed limit. We've been talking about reducing the speed in the community regardless. So I don't think it's really necessarily contingent on this project per se. So I would certainly move all the options in option 1 with the exception of D, or of E.
Okay, we've been talking about having a public conversation about it, which hasn't actually happened yet. So I guess, Councillor Kroll, you're suggesting we have that public dialogue first about speed limits, and yeah, I think that's sensible. But is the reason it's here now because it needs to happen sooner?
No, it doesn't need to happen sooner. It's just there as an option just to address it because it was discussed in the report. And if council wanted to move it, then it's there.
Okay, I see. Councillor Lumley?
Well, it's here nor there. But I think, I'm gonna ask the mayor, I think there was a motion already on the table. I know Councillor Kroll just made a motion, but I think Councillor DeAndrade already made a motion.
Did you second it?
No.
Yeah, see, nobody seconded it. So we need to, it's not on the table until it's seconded.
Okay.
So, and still no one seconded Councillor Kroll. So if you want to make a motion now, you've got the floor. And maybe someone will second it. We'll see. No? Or you could second Councillor Kroll's motion, but
I'll make a motion to adjourn, I guess.
well, that's serious business. Does anyone want to second it? No, okay. So do you want to, does anyone want to try making a motion? Okay, Councillor Thompson.
I'm seconding Councillor Kroll's.
Okay, so that's with, that's option 1 with the exception of E. Okay. And that's seconded. Sorry, just staff.
Sorry, I'm just asking, just for clarification, with the exception of E, or was it D?
E is an echo.
Okay, thanks.
So, oh, no, sorry. Okay. Okay, well, I'm going to be opposing this, but, okay, so that's been seconded. I oppose going to third reading at this point. I think we should be having that's, I thought the feedback I was getting from council after our last meeting was that to slow things down a bit, and now I thought I heard that from you, Councillor Thompson, and you just seconded a motion to speed it up, so I'll oppose. Is there any more discussion?
Mayor, can you clarify, because when okay, I got a little bit, Councilor Crowe, I second his motion. I was thinking that is to bring the option 1, which is just for second reading, and bring the public information meeting before. So if there's any feedback from the community that we haven't considered, we have still time to discuss before third reading. That's the motion that is on the table.
No.
Okay, so.
No, it included D, that there be third reading, so. If you want to, I mean, maybe more of us could support it if anybody wants to amend it to remove D as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so Councillor Lumley is proposing an amendment to remove D,
I second.
seconded by Councillor DeAndrade. Any discussion? All those in favor? The motion carries, so Now we're looking at option 1, A and B, and also C, that a public information meeting be held. Any discussion on this? All those in favor? The motion carries. So I think we're through Billy's Walk. I'd like to propose to invite Matt Thompson up earlier, if we can. He's been patiently waiting already. Can we, does that work for staff? Yeah, okay. So we're looking all the way down to
7.1.
7.1, yeah. That work for everybody? Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Can you hear me? This is live. There we go. Thank you very much, Mayor and Council, for your time today. Should I be pointing this somewhere? Okay. Yeah, I'll just say next slide. Thanks. Thanks, Leslie Ann. So I'm here today to report on the process that we've been undertaking since spring with the town of Gibsons. I should note that we've done the District of Seashelt in parallel. So I brought that report to council a few weeks ago, and it was received. For the interim housing needs report that is required under new legislation by the provincial government. So as I'm sure most of this council remembers, in 2017, 2018, the province passed legislation requiring local governments to undertake housing needs reports to assess the nature of housing need and demand in their communities. In late last year, an update to that legislation was provided by the province, which requires local governments to undertake an interim update by the end of this calendar year, or January 1st of next year. These can be fairly short form updates because there are only three main requirements. Local governments are required to describe what actions they have taken to address housing or to act on housing since their previous housing needs report. They're required to include an additional key statement of need around public transit and housing. And the third, and possibly the most important component, is the implementation of a new methodology for assessing 20-year housing need in communities in BC. So that is coming at the end of this presentation, but staff requested a more comprehensive update that looks at some demographic and economic and other housing indicators to be updated. So that's the report that you have in front of you. This goes above and beyond the provincial requirements, and by receiving it today, you're in accordance with provincial legislation requiring this by the end of the year. The majority of this work is drawing from the 2021 census, so it is a few years old, but it's the most recent data that we've got. In some cases, we've looked at, we've been using BC Stats and BC assessment data. There's also data from other sources, other provincial sources primarily as well. So if anything's unclear as to the data source, please just let me know and I can clarify that. So next slide, please. So the report itself contains four main sections. In addition to a short executive summary and an introduction, a bit of a review of current and historical demographics, so kind of what's happening with our population and the community and households. A housing profile, so looking at housing stock, household income. There's an affordability analysis and an assessment of core housing need, which is our primary indicator of housing vulnerability in Canada. There's a short section on community growth, and finally then the summary of the new provincial requirements, including key statements of need and this 5 and 20-year housing capacity assessment. So next slide, please. So moving into some of the key indicators, this slide shows us the growth of the town over the last 4 census periods from 2006 to 2021. And what we can see is that, you know, we're on an upward trajectory, but it's a fairly slow-paced growth over the last number of years. And in fact, I think many of us were surprised when the 2021 figures came out and the town hadn't gone over 5,000 residents. We do know that the census is a bit of an undercount, typically anywhere from a 3 to 5% undercount of actual population. This is typically adjusted in some of BC Stats work when they do population estimates for a community. So you may see discrepancies when you're looking at BC Stats data. It's different from the census data because it accounts for that undercount. So overall, we saw a growth rate of 3.3% between 2016 and 2021, which was actually slower or lower than the region as a whole. Notably, our population has a large component of seniors. Nearly 1/3 of our population in 2021 was age 65 or older. So that really points to the importance of planning for aging in place, planning for senior supports, and housing is a key component of that, but it also points to the need for wraparound services and supports to allow for aging in place. Next slide, please. So this slide shows us the tenure mix in the town over the last 4 census periods. Overall, we've seen growth, but I think that there's something really interesting and maybe concerning happening between 2016 and 2021. Where the proportion of renters goes from 28% of all households being renters down to 25%. And that's not just because there was growth in ownership and it kind of outpaced it. You can actually see from the numbers there that we've lost 60 renter households over that period of time. This is something we saw in Seashelt as well. Seashelt also saw a decline in the total number of renters in the community over that time period. And one of the things that it may be pointing to, and it's hard to get into it without a more detailed economic analysis of renters, which the census profile doesn't have that information. You kind of have to request it custom from the census or from StatsCan. But what it may be pointing to is a loss of lower income renters in the community. We know anecdotally in working with organizations like Cover the Coast and the Affordable Housing Society that there's a big struggle out there in terms of workforce housing. And of course, a lot of our workforce relies on rental housing, which we know is scarce. There's not a lot of purpose-built rental housing, and renting in the secondary rental market is less secure than renting in purpose-built rental. And so this does appear to be a trend in both the municipalities on the Sunshine Coast where we're losing renters. And because we're not actually doing the SCRD's assessment, we haven't looked closely at their data. It's not clear whether people are leaving the towns and going to the rural areas or whether they're leaving the coast altogether. But it certainly does kind of raise some flags around potential affordability issues. And this is the real potential impact of the housing crisis in our communities. We start to lose some of our workforce. Either from living directly in our communities and needing to move further out and therefore commute further, or losing them altogether from the coast. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the mix of housing stock in Gibsons. As we can see, the majority of our housing stock is single detached, with a little over half of the total homes or total units. But we can also see that we have a growing missing middle housing stock, with nearly 1 in 5 units in small apartments. 12% of our stock is in row housing or semi-detached housing. So we're moving towards kind of a more diverse housing stock over time. And we do know that there's pretty good correlation between diversity in the housing stock and a variety of price points. We know that condominiums are typically less expensive than single-family homes. And that row houses are also more or less expensive, more affordable. And so, this is kind of showing us that mix. I think in the report we actually have it historically as well, but that's not available here. So next slide, please. So this shows renter incomes, or renter and owner and total incomes for all households in Gibsons. So it's broken up by tenure. And then also sort of presented amalgamated. So the blue graph the blue bars on the left shows owner income from 2006 to 2021. The brown bar is renter income in the same period, and then the light blue is the total or average of all households. And so, of course, I think we know from the previous housing needs report that that renters typically earn a lot less than owners, and that is, indicative of the fact that renting is not necessarily always a choice. It's an affordability decision because you may not be able to pay a mortgage or be able to afford a down payment, and so renters are probably in more pressure in the housing market because they have fewer choices, particularly in a community that doesn't have a lot of purpose-built rental. So there is something interesting kind of happening between 2016 and 2021, which is that we see a big jump in incomes right across the board, including in the renter category. So I spoke earlier about the loss of renters in the community. Again, might be interesting, particularly in partnership with Seashelt and the SCRD, to look at renter incomes in more detail. But we can see this jump here that may be partly attributed to the loss of lower income renters. We do also know for sure that the CERB benefit impacted renters in renter income in 2021, actually bringing it up more than we would have expected. This also accounts for why we actually see a decline in renter core housing need, which we'll see in a later slide. So effectively, we're seeing this overall increase in incomes across this time period in Gibsons, and an unexpected jump for renters that may not bear out over time. We might see that decline again in the next census because of this kind of artificial buoying that CERB caused, and that's something that we're seeing in a lot of communities. And in fact, it's not as pronounced in Gibsons as some of the other communities that we're studying. So next slide, please. So this is cost of rental housing. Because of the size of Gibsons and the lack of purpose-built rental stock, there's not great data from CMHC. So this is actually taken from a scan that Cover the Coast did in order to kind of assess what's happening out there in the market. And so in 2023 and early 2024, they undertook this secondary rental market scan. So looking at single family homes being rented out, secondary suites, private apartments or row houses, sort of all forms of housing that aren't purpose-built rental. And this was the cost of renting on average by unit size. So ranging from about $1,500 for your average studio all the way up to about $4,000 for a 4 or greater bedroom. So we can start to see here that the affordability issue that we're running into, which is that renters have lower incomes and the cost of renting has climbed dramatically over the last number of years. I can remember doing similar surveys probably back in 2016, 17, and we were looking at sort of $900 for a studio and probably in the range of $2,500 for a 3 to 4 bedroom. So big increases in cost, and renter incomes are not keeping pace with that. And so that's a major challenge in terms of the affordability pressures we're seeing. Next slide, please. So what does that translate to in terms of an affordability analysis? So what we've done here is we've taken that secondary rental market scan, and we've taken an estimated median income of renters in 2024, and we've said can these different household groups afford to live or afford to rent a unit in Gibsons at the rates that we're seeing in that scan? And the answer across the board is pretty much no. So couples without children can afford to pay, with a median income of about $58,000, can afford to pay, between 30% and 50% for a studio. So that's a couple without children. But anything more than that, and they'd be paying 50% or more of their income towards it. Similarly, couples with children who are amongst some of the highest earners, because that group tends to be mid-career, usually a higher earning potential. Couples without children often include a lot of retirees who are on fixed income. So that group can afford to rent, not affordably, not at less than 30%, but at least less than 50% of their income going towards shelter costs. Similarly, other census families are in that boat. But the real challenge comes for lone parent families and non-census families, who tend to be more renters, tend to be more single income households, and they've also got the lowest incomes there based on the analysis. And so right across the board, housing in Gibsons is just not affordable in terms of the rental market for these groups. Next slide, please. Then one more slide, and then I think we move into some of the ownership information. So this slide just shows the age of our rental stock. This is a very small proportion, or actually, no, sorry, this is based on where all renters are living. So a lot of this is the secondary rental market. That is private homes that are being rented out because we have such a small number of purpose-built rental. But you can see that it varies from a large portion of the homes actually being built kind of prior to or between 1961 and 1980. Nearly a third of our homes were built before that, and an additional 13% built prior to 1960. So nearly half of renters live in homes that are more than 40 years old. And that's not necessarily, lots of homes older than 40 years old can be in very good shape, but we do know that older homes tend to need more upkeep, and so you may run into more maintenance and adequacy issues in those older homes with nearly half of renters living in them. Next slide, please. So this slide, now we move into kind of looking at the cost of home ownership. So we can see this graph, the shape of this graph is the same shape that we see in communities right across BC, whether you're talking about the city of Vancouver or Nelson or Gibsons or Vancouver Island communities. The one exception probably being northeastern BC, which has seen more of a kind of flat line of housing cost. But what this slide is really telling us is this kind of story over time, sort of post-2008 housing crisis, flat or even declining housing prices, slow growth in the period from kind of 2010 to 2014, and that's when we start to see an uptick in the market. And this is true right across the board. One of the interesting things that we've noticed about doing this work is that right around 2014, 15, 16, when prices start to go up in terms of homes, vacancy rates in the rental market start to go down. So it's a pretty strong correlation between the cost of ownership housing and the demand for rental housing. As the cost of ownership goes up, there's more demand and pressure in the rental market because fewer people can afford to purchase. And so then we see kind of a spike around 2018-19. That's about the time when some of the cooling measures that the current provincial government put into place start to have effect in some of the larger markets, and that kind of plays out here too. There's an overall cooling, but then right around 2020, things really spike, and that's that sort of COVID uptick that we started to see. And you can see just how much prices generally across the board, whether you're talking about single family or dwelling with suites or even row housing or apartments, they really start to swing up right around 2021. And that's again, anecdotally, right around the period when we were hearing about homes going in Gibsons for $100,000 over asking with no requirements on the deal. So, again, the pace at which this growth is happening it's outgrowing growth in income. And this is, again, it's a trend that we're seeing in communities across BC, but it's concerning because it means that, when we have the cost of ownership outpacing income growth, we're effectively shrinking the pool of residents who will be able to afford over the long term to those that are on the higher earning end of the income continuum. I think we can go to the next slide now. So again, what does this mean in terms of affordability? So this is a median household income for owners broken out by different groups. Again, it tends to be the couples without children and couples with children that are marginal, that can afford sort of the more compact or denser forms of housing, from townhomes to apartments to multiplex style homes. The gray spots actually speak to affordability. So, the multiplex is actually affordable for couples with children and other census families. For couples without children, most forms of housing are affordable except for single detached, and single detached remains generally unaffordable for all median earning households. I will note that this slide, or this analysis in particular, is about your first purchase. So if you already have an asset in the market and you sell your home and buy a new home, this analysis isn't relevant. It's about those folks that are getting into the market for the first time. There are some assumptions built in here. We did this analysis a little bit earlier this year, so interest rates were a bit higher, and there is, it seems to be trending downwards. So that's going to ease pressure on mortgages a little bit for families, but it's really just a small offset in comparison to the big increase in prices that we've seen over the last few years. So next slide, please. So this brings us to the question of core housing need. So a reminder about what core housing need is. It's a two-stage indicator developed by StatsCan and CMHC, which asks a couple of questions. First of all, they use kind of three indicators as the basis for determining whether you may have a housing vulnerability. One is the affordability question. So we all know this. If you're paying 30% or more of your income, you're considered to be in an unaffordable situation. So that's the affordability indicator. Suitability is about whether or not you're experiencing overcrowding. Do you have enough bedrooms for the number of people in your household? And adequacy is about state of maintenance. So do you have black mold that may cause health issues? Do you have running water? Do you have electricity? Is your furnace running? All those things sort of factor in. And the way that StatsCan measures core housing need is they say, are you experiencing one or more of these issues, like an affordability issue or an adequacy issue? And if the answer to that question is yes, then they take a look at your income and they say, can you afford a reasonable alternative in your community? So if, for example, somebody who's earning $500,000 a year wants to pay more than 30% of their income towards housing, they can do it. And they wouldn't be in core housing need because they can go out into the market and switch homes if they need to. So it's this two-stage that really gives us a sense of vulnerability within the community. And tells us what proportion of owners and renters are experiencing this vulnerability. And you'll see that there are kind of three bars. Blue is the core housing need, but excluding extreme core housing need, so households paying 50% or more of their income towards housing. The brown is that extreme core housing need, and then the light blue on the right is those two things combined. So, for example, we can see that in 2016, 31% of renters were in core housing need or extreme core housing need. That is experiencing significant pressures in the housing market and probably sort of living either paycheck to paycheck or experiencing some form of housing precarity. What's interesting is that that proportion, especially amongst renters, declines between 2016 and 2021. In the midst of a housing crisis, as vacancy rates are down, cost of housing is up, cost of rental is up, we have to ask ourselves why that's happening. And it is a blip, and it's been tracked. StatsCan has a statement on it. UBC has released a statement on it, which are footnoted in the report. It's because of the CERB benefit, which momentarily kind of buoyed renter incomes, especially lower income renters were disproportionately beneficiaries of the CERB benefit. And that gave them enough income support to actually pull a lot of these households out of precarity or vulnerability. And so, like I like to use this slide or this set of data, and I really wish somebody would write a PhD thesis about the impact of this income support, because we know that housing supply is a key part of the solution to the housing crisis. We have to bring on new supply to meet demand and to meet some of the slides that we're talking about later. But we also know that senior government policy is absolutely pivotal and that income supports work. I mean, this slide shows that income supports work when it comes to addressing housing vulnerability. It's not the only solution. We shouldn't just look to an income support, but it does mean that that's part of the policy solution as well. So local government has its role to play, but so does senior government. So next slide, please. And on that note, homelessness, homelessness is kind of the extreme end result of this housing vulnerability and precarity. And so, we have undertaken a couple of regional point in time homeless counts here on the coast. The most recent one enumerated 97 individuals experiencing homelessness between Seashelt and Gibsons. We also know there was a provincial report that is the basis for some of the later calculations I'll show you, that looked at homelessness right across the province by regional district, and they used income assistance data from the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction. So they used their income assistance data and identified folks receiving either income assistance or disability assistance who have no fixed address. So they're in the system, they're receiving a benefit, but they don't have a home address. These might be folks that are in shelters, they might be living on the street or camping rough, they might be couch surfing or using any number of other coping tools, living in vehicles, living on boats. And so based on that study, I know that there's a more recent one. The report has not been released yet by the province, but they did an analysis. They updated it in 2023. But for 2021, 146 individuals were found on the Sunshine Coast as a whole to be receiving those benefits and having no fixed address. And based on the way that the province wants us to break those out by region, it's done on a per capita basis. So what that means in terms of the final calculation for the OCP capacity and the housing needs assessment is that 45 individuals of that sort of global 146 who are on the Sunshine Coast, 45 would need to be housed in Gibsons. One of the challenges with the provincial methodology is it doesn't really account for our rural areas, and so it's also distributing some of those folks to Area A or Area B. So really what this means is that we should be viewing these numbers, that 45 individuals, as an absolute bare minimum in terms of supporting. We want services in Gibsons and Sechelt where the municipal centers are. So that should really be viewed as a bare minimum in terms of addressing need on homelessness on the Sunshine Coast. Next slide, please. So this slide shows growth over roughly the next 10 years out to 2034. The actual assessment itself that we'll see in a few slides does go all the way out to 2041. But this, for the purposes of kind of understanding where we think trends may be going, based on historical growth. You can effectively see that we're growing across both owners and renters on the Sunshine Coast with a roughly comparable share of renters and owners out into the future, remaining at about 25% of the overall households. Again, this is based on historical growth. One of the things that we know about projections is that they're not prescriptive and they're not predictive. In the midst of a housing crisis, if we were to, for example, open up 5,000 units tomorrow, given the housing pressures that we see in Vancouver, we might have 5,000 new residents. So what this is telling us is sort of where trends may take us if we go business as usual based on historical growth patterns. The reality of the pressures that we see in front of us right now are much stronger and kind of point to the need for more action or more consideration of both the overall need to accommodate residents, but also really key is the affordability piece of this picture. Next slide, please. So the Housing Needs Report updates the 7 key issue or key statement areas that were in the previous Housing Needs Report. I'm not going to go into them because they're very similar. The issues are quite similar to where they were just a couple of years ago when that report was developed. Some of the numbers are updated now based on the 2021 census, but overall, the same pressures are there for many of these households right across the region and especially here in Gibsons. Next slide, please. So this brings us to the last couple of slides, and this is the provincial requirement for part of the new Housing Needs Report. They have developed essentially a 5 and 20-year needs assessment, so based on a whole bunch of components and considerations. The first is this supply to reduce extreme core housing needs. So how many affordable units do we need to address that question of affordability, for example? Second component is how many units do we need to build to address homelessness? The third one is how many units do we need to bring suppressed household formation, which is the notion that households aren't forming the way that they used to. Younger renters are not necessarily, or younger people are not necessarily able to leave the home and form a new renter household the way that they used to, and renters are not always able to purchase a home the way that they used to sort of 20 years ago. So that third component is about sort of how many units would we need to bring us back up to where our household growth and development was happening about 20 years ago. The fourth component is just growth, so projected population and household growth in the region. It's based on 2 scenarios. One is based on local growth, so essentially saying, what have we seen in terms of local growth over the last 20 years? And the other scenario is essentially asks the question, what would this community look like if it was growing at the pace of the region? So we saw from an earlier slide that the region's growing a little bit faster than Gibsons, and then the province requires that those 2 be averaged, and that's kind of the number that's given to this household growth component. Then there's a rental vacancy rate adjustment, which is, assuming that all of these other components are built out and that a reasonable amount of rental is built within them. How much additional rental housing do we need to bring us up to a 3% vacancy rate, which is considered kind of the bottom of a healthy rental market. And then finally, there's this demand buffer, which is, this one's a little bit of a black box for me because it's one of those economic indicators that's sort of put on to say, in order to have a healthy market, you need to add a buffer of homes that can be used essentially for people to choose, right? So a lot of what we're talking about is the need to address population growth, the need to address affordability issues, but we also know that choice and demand are key factors in the housing market, and so to accommodate that demand, the province has sort of developed this demand buffer. And so that's on the next slide, which I think we can flip to now, we'll see what these numbers look like out over the sort of 5 and 20-year period. So, effectively what this is telling us is that over the 5-year period from 2021 to 2026, with all these different components in place, Gibsons needs to account for about 331 new homes to accommodate. Most of that is growth. You can see 225 of those units would be supplied to meet household growth, but there's also affordability considerations and the demand buffer in here. For the long range, and this is the key part for the official community plan, Gibsons needs to be able to accommodate in its OCP, which needs to be completed under provincial legislation by the end of next year, an additional 1,057 units above and beyond. We know that in a lot of the larger communities that received the SMU, the small scale multi-unit housing legislation, which we are just below the threshold of, that a lot of that capacity was picked up in the SMU and the increased density on single family lots, as well as the transit-oriented areas that were designated in a lot of urban areas. The same is not true for smaller communities. So it is going to be a question as your team, council and staff and your consultants work through the OCP to kind of consider where that growth is going to be focused and what it's going to look like in terms of mix of tenure and affordability and types of units. And I think that's the last slide for the presentation, and I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, a lot of information there. I first want to just open up with some questions about the program itself. I'm finding it a little awkward that this is the province's decision, though. The province has this requirement now for 5-year housing needs reports, and they're now all set to be like 3 or 4 years after the census. So here we are hearing about information that we largely already know because you've told us this before, and we've all seen it in the census because it's from 2021. And I appreciate there were some updates of some other information too, but the province has set out the schedule, so it's like that's the schedule they set out. Why?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I would maybe hold that one for the minister. But I do know, I think part of the push behind this current deadline is to allow OCPs to be updated next year. So they've created a really tight schedule of work for local governments. I would suggest that some of that is probably driven by the fact that we're in an election period right now, and so desire to be seen taking action on this file. I do know that the next round of updates are required to take place in 2028 for local governments. So that will be 2 years out from the census, which is not, like, by data standards, not that far out. And it typically takes, a year for some of the demographic data to come out from the census, and then another year for the housing stock. We typically don't get the housing stock data until about 1.5 years or 2 years after the census anyways. So that actually won't be too bad a schedule, and the province does provide a custom data set to local governments for some of this work, so it's expected that would be provided in 2028. So then you'll have a lag of 2 years, which is not ideal, but we've certainly seen worse in terms of kind of update schedules for these types of reports before.
Yeah, I mean, it does confirm that we've made the right decisions, I think, a couple years ago when we realized we were in serious housing need. So at least there's that. Other councillors have questions? Councillor D'Andretti?
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks for the report. If you can display the last page. Yeah, so I fully understand, I read the report and understood the logics, the calculations. I think when I look at this last page, the summary, what I'm having problems is, okay, supply to reduce homeless. That I understand because I'm assuming that homeless has to be subsidized. So so right now from this report, I'm saying, okay, we need 11 units subsidized, 6 with on-site supports and 5 without. So that's clear to me. But if I look at the other components, for example, the first one, supply to reduce extreme core, are we assuming that this supply total of 32 up to 26, are they all affordable housing?
So there's two components within that calculation. One is renters in extreme core housing need, and one is owners with a mortgage. So owners without a mortgage are left out of that piece because they're assumed to have an asset that would serve them in the market. Even then, it's hard to tell whether an owner with a mortgage has 1 year left on their mortgage or 24 years left on their mortgage. But effectively, the entire renter component of that, I would suggest, needs to be affordable housing. The owner component, there may be a little bit more gray area, and it's more about providing a suite of options for folks to downsize, for example. But the large majority of that group in component A would be renters. I'm sorry, I don't have the breakdown in front of me. And those renters would need, yes, affordable housing. Typically kind of either ranging from deep subsidy to moderate affordability.
Okay, may I continue the question? Yeah, and so what about supply to meet household growth?
So that's population growth, and there again, when you do projections, you build a lot of assumptions into them. But one of the things that we should be assuming is that there's an income range within there. So some of those folks might be very wealthy, some of them might be very low income, and the point is that within that 655 out over the next 20 years, we need some affordable options, we need some near market options, we need some market rental, and we need some market ownership as well. So that's a bit trickier. We have done some deeper analysis in other communities, and it gets a little bit trickier because you're baking in the fact that a lot of low income folks in our communities are here and can afford to be here because they've been here for a long time. They wouldn't necessarily be coming here as a first choice unless maybe they've inherited a home or there's a job opportunity. So it's really hard to kind of bake in a whole lot of assumptions into that and get a really robust income breakdown. But I think the basic messaging is that when we think about population growth and diverse communities, we want a diversity of incomes to be included in our community. And that means everything from really affordable housing all the way up to market ownership options. And a diversity of those market ownership options needs to be something that's considered.
Okay. Can I ask the last question? It has to do, well, I think as a policymaker, obviously, what I would like is to really have an understanding, okay, what do we need in terms of seniors housing in terms of number and how many bedrooms for family housing. And I know there's the breakdown, but I wonder if it's possible to capture in a table that makes really easy to understand and not.
It can be done. It takes more work and takes another set of assumptions. I'm happy to chat with your planning department about that going into the future. I think that there are, in terms of some of the seniors numbers, for example, that should be found in the core housing need breakdown in that key statement of need. So there should be some of that information, specific to Indigenous households, specific to seniors households, specific to renters, for example. In terms of putting it in one place, part of the challenge is some of the seniors who are in core housing need may also be the renters who are in core housing need, and so you don't want to double count them. And so putting it into a table, it might not necessarily add up to the same number that you have here, because you might be kind of double counting folks that are in one bucket and also in the other bucket. So.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. It's a great amount of information in that report and very relevant. Thank you. How was the rental market monthly rates calculated? What data was used?
That was based on a survey of online listings. So There's basically one source for rental data in Canada, and it is CMHC. And they do a rental market survey once a year, and then they publish the results usually in January. And if a community is too small, they don't publish results. Typically, you're looking at 10,000 or more, so Gibsons does not fall into that. And so then we as researchers are left to try to find other avenues. And particularly in smaller communities now, Kijiji and Craigslist tend to be the primary advertising sources. So we scan those, and we didn't do the scan. It was done by Cover the Coast, but it's done using a methodology that we've employed in the past. So.
Councillor Kroll.
Thank you, Mayor White. Thank you. It's an amazing report, and I think considering some of the decisions we have coming up, it's really made a lot of that decision-making much simpler. Having said that, I would like to move option 1, that the 2024 Housing Needs Report be endorsed.
I have another question. And no one's seconding it, so I'll ask my question. I wanted to ask about the data again. I mean, this is similar to what Councillor Thompson just asked. When we're in a situation when we've got this problem with the province's scheduling here of these reports coming in after the census, long after the census being required, and also we're a small community that's not getting the CMHC data, is there anything we can do to get more data in the meantime, so that these reports could kind of give us some more up-to-date information?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the majority of this is from the census, so I would suggest that you've got an OCP process underway right now. That's going to be completed by the end of next year. Then the following year, we will have a census year, and then we'd anticipate results coming out, probably like early population information in late 2026, and then some of the more detailed demographic information in 2027. As that information starts to come out, you could have a brief community profile put together that sort of adds a graph every time they do a data drop, where you may get your population information in 2027. And so you could start building out a little bit of a community profile. It may just be, Excel spreadsheet, or it may be, a brief PowerPoint that has some of these trends. We will be providing all the data that we've collected to staff, so that they can use those as a bit of a framework for updating. They can plug them into an Excel sheet. But I would suggest that it's probably about tracking the data drops that are done by CMHC, and then directing staff to kind of do a few tables building on that can then be brought forward to council. And then you've got the data for when you do your next housing needs report. You've got a bunch of that collected already, and you can just kind of put it into the report.
Thanks, Councillor DeAndretti.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, based on these numbers, when I see 331 units needed, I think we are already reached that, giving all the approvals.
Well, we already know we need, we already know we have high needs for sure, yeah.
Yeah, but I think what I'm not 100% sure is if all the buildings that we have approved, have met the demand per category, right? It seems to me that we approve a lot of seniors, and we are doing a lot of affordable housing. Is there a way of providing, whether it's a staff report independent or through this report, just based on what we approved, perhaps since 2021, or I don't know how to, because the last few years, we approve a lot of units, so it feels like, okay, we already
A
few months is excellent.
Yeah, I mean, I think we did include in the report building permits over the last number of years. So you can use that as a trend line to say, do these bars over the last 4 years, 3 years add up to where this 331 that we're seeing. The one thing that doesn't get into is the question of affordability, because it's just building permits, right? It's by type. It doesn't tell us necessarily by tenure, although that may be the building department may have that information as well. But I'd suggest that is something that a lot of municipalities are moving towards, is a more robust system of monitoring exactly what but if you're doing that through your accelerator funding anyways, I would suggest that some of the reporting that comes out of that staff have to do anyways could be used to say, yes, we're on track with this, or we're off track, or we need more affordable, or, yeah.
Oh, we've got staff.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just going to add to what Matt was saying. There have been a lot of development applications approved by council, but not all of them are building out, is what we're seeing as well. But we are tracking through the Housing Accelerator Fund all the building permits that are being issued and what type of units are being provided and what the tenure is as well, from negotiations and covenants and that kind of information.
Thanks. Yeah, that's an important reminder. We get this dialogue in the community a lot too, that all these units are happening. They're suddenly going to be here, and it's really just rezoning. It's not necessarily mean. I haven't seen these units suddenly appear overnight ever. So do we have a motion? I think Councillor Kroll made the motion to endorse this, seconded by Councillor Lumley. Any discussion? All those in favor? The motion carries. Thank you. So now let's go back to bylaws. We've got 5.2 and 5.3, which are both for adoption. So these have already been thoroughly discussed by council. So I just need a motion to put these forward. Moved by Councillor Kroll, seconded by Councillor Thompson. All those in favor? Is that okay with, yeah, all those in favor to pass, these are both the bylaws for adoption. 5.2 and 5.3. Okay, I'm looking at a different agenda. I've got a printed out agenda here. I may have a newer agenda than you have. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah, there's no, this one has a delegation still, so. Yeah. So now on to committee reports. There are committee of the whole meeting minutes for information there. And coming out of that meeting, we have a OCP and zoning amendment recommendation for a duplex at 528 Marine Drive. And I think this was the wording that was arrived at the meeting, but we had a lot of discussion at this meeting too about just how we wanted to schedule our development processes here. So, Councillor Kroll.
Thank you, Mayor White. I think something Councillor Andretti was trying to bring to your attention was that when the agenda first came up, the ADP minutes weren't, with respect to this project, weren't in the agenda. They now are in the agenda, and I'm assuming that all council has had an opportunity to review those comments from the ADP. And if I may, prior to us talking about 528, I would like to make a motion with respect to developments on the foreshore.
I've introduced this topic, though. Kind of, so this is related to 528?
It's related to any new development on the foreshore.
So this needs to come in before.
Well, I just want to
Before the-
flag it before we, get into yet another project on the foreshore.
So this might have implications on where we go with 528. Is this motion?
Yes.
Okay.
The motion is that staff bring forward recommendations on four future-proofing the waterfront properties currently served by foreshore sanitary sewage mains, which in the long range, we're potentially looking at having to move the main sewer line for the town along the foreshore, which would necessitate going from gravity feed to sewage pumps, and that any new buildings on the foreshore should be aware of that.
Okay. Okay, it's been seconded. I want to look to staff just to ask if this has any implications on this. I mean, this is under the 528 Marine Drive. And if that motion is clear about future-proofing, if that wording works.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, the Director of Infrastructure Services and I have been aware of this. So this is about ensuring future development of those sites have the infrastructure for when the town, or eventually when the town moves the infrastructure up to Marine Drive or Gower Point Road, so that they can tie into it. So this motion is asking for recommendations from staff. So what we would do is go back and look at what properties would be affected by moving infrastructure and coming forward with recommendations to put into our bylaw, probably bylaw 1175, which is the servicing bylaw.
Okay, so it's clear then. Any discussion at council? All those in favor? The motion carries. So back to this specific development, which is 528 Marine Drive. We do have that, as I introduced, this recommended wording in front of us, though, yeah, there is another option. There are some other options that have been shared by email. And are you putting those forward, Councillor DeAndretti?
It's just a question, because a clarification actually, because there is the results of the ADP minutes, and we should wait, I mean, if we agree or not. That's what I think, it's more logical, if we have to agree with some feedback, to provide the developer before he goes publicly, right? Instead of showing the project publicly, then we wait, maybe we want them to make some change. So that's why I thought it would be important to consider the results of the ADP minutes before. The recommendations, pardon me.
Okay. Councillor Kroll?
Thank you, Mayor White. The ADP minutes are purely for information and guidance in decision-making. So as I said earlier, I am assuming council had the opportunity to review the ADP minutes.
Councillor Lumley?
Yeah, through the mayor. I always review them, but I get confused when I read them at the end because I think in the minutes, I'm looking at like two different agendas here, but I think, I'm not sure that the way the ADP presents to council is, I'm not comfortable with it, I guess, when I read the minutes. Because they're advising council to, like the motion, I guess, put forward by the ADP was to advise council to support the application. I'm just not comfortable with, because I always thought the ADP was to give suggestions or bring maybe concerns or up to council when they're considering it, but I'm just not sure that the ADP is clear on, like, because they're advising council to support, you know what I'm saying? I don't know if
I think maybe the advising is fine, right? It's by definition, they're here for advice, but maybe your concern is like the support or not is more of a political decision. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Councillor Lumley? Okay. I'll look to staff on this.
Thank you, Mayor. Just wanted to clarify, the ADP did look at this, but their scope was looking at the form and character. So they were looking at the design guidelines and the form and character development permit. So it's not, they didn't advise on the zoning amendment at this point or the OCP amendment. Just form and character, which is their role is supposed to advise council on whether it supports the design guidelines or not. So in this case, they do support it, and they had a few changes to the street facade. So they asked for some more windows and some landscaping. But the development permit is not in the committee minutes that have come forward. So what has come forward is specific to the land use decision, which is the OCP and the zoning amendment.
Is that your concern? Is it is that, or is the role of the ADP in? Sorry. Maybe I was wrong. Sorry. But I actually need to find these minutes because I finally got on, but I'd like to have them in front of me. Where, as other councillors have mentioned, they're hard to find in the agenda. 6.1.6. Okay. 99. Okay, yeah, they're referenced in this, but they're not actually in this report because it's from committee. Yeah, okay. Okay, so I think maybe what I'm hearing is, I mean, there's a lot of concern about these minutes, and I guess the question is, is this a place where council would say, yes, we endorse what the ADP is asking for, and we want these suggestions to be brought forward by second reading, or are we by third reading? Yeah, it would be by second reading, I guess. Yeah, I'll go to staff on that.
Thanks, Mayor. Council can receive these minutes, and if you want to let the applicant know that you're going to take the ADP's recommendation, then you can also pass that. You don't have to. The decision for the form and character development permit isn't on the table right now. But when it comes up, you may want to include the ADP minutes or the ADP recommendation if you agree with them.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's an option for council but I think to address Councillor Lumley's concern, it's more just semantics here, that it probably should say, we just want, I'm wondering if just in this conversation, we just want to know if the ADP supports the form and character rather than is actually telling us to support it ourselves. Is that, yeah. So the wording should be more that we want to know if the ADP supports this, but it's not their role to be advising us on our decision-making. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and it's not because I don't agree with anything the ADP says, or not that I can't appreciate that. I just think it blurs the lines for even the developer because what if council doesn't support it, or what if council doesn't support one of the changes? And like the ADP has this clear direction to tell council to support it. You know what I'm saying? Like it's you have to kind of leave it open for council. You can't direct council or point council in a direction. You have to just leave it open and say, well, I'm not sure about this, but this is great. And then council gets to read the minutes and go, hey, I agree with that. I don't agree with this. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah. So, I mean, it's an overall direction, and I find that a bit, not for me personally, or probably for any other councillor, but just it creates a bit of confusion maybe, Mayor, that, somebody's going to sit here with a proposal and go, well, the ADP liked it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I think there's been a lot of that confusion recently, for sure. Councillor Kroll?
Thank you, Mayor White. I think it can simply be resolved in working with staff to the options that are provided to the ADP, because the option proposal was that the ADP advises council to support the form and character DP 2024-21 proposal for a duplex at 528 Marine Drive as presented, which is the first option. We went with the second option with the following changes. So it's just the wording that the ADP is given by staff to, in what comes back to council. So it can be very simply rectified in the agenda to the ADP on what exactly council wants. And, basically the ADP was in support of the project for form and character. And that's information being provided to council for consideration. It's nothing binding.
Okay, I think we've run this conversation out. I think staff's going to take some of this back to ADP for sure. So I just want to try to move this actual application forward if we can. Are we on board with that? So we've got a recommendation in front of us that came from our committee of the whole. What we could certainly, coming out of discussion afterwards for both of the projects that came out of the committee of the whole, we're not so comfortable with the prescribed date, setting that public hearing date right now for this or the lots A and C Gibsons Way. But we could give staff some direction to schedule a public hearing. Given that this has received a positive, it's gone to the ADP and the reception is relatively positive, we could do a second reading for this as well. And then it would, because it still does have to go to a public hearing anyway. Because we should have a reason for it to come back if it's, and then thirdly, we could formalize those ADP recommendations in our own recommendation here. These ones about more attention to the front entrances. I mean, they're fairly general. I don't know if that's a problem though for if we were to make them. I mean, they're fairly general. They'd be hard to measure then, but that would be staff's.
Yeah, that would help. If council wants to do that, you can
Okay.
pass that motion.
Okay. So I guess so that would be that it be given second reading. So they'd be given first and second reading. Looking at this recommendation, I'm just hoping Rebecca's catching this too. Yeah. First and second reading. And that there be that a public hearing be scheduled, period. And then somewhere in there, and that the developer, the following changes, I'm just trying to word it. Sorry. I think I'm looking at the right thing. I'm just trying to find the right verb here. Do you have the right verb? This I have, yeah. I'm trying to get to the ADP recommendations. So the developer offer more attention. Okay, and I just, it's not written in a way that's easy to put into this motion.
Mayor, may
Yeah.
I try for you?
Can you try?
I can attempt
Yeah.
it. And that the developer integrate the recommendation from the ADP in for their form and character development permit.
Okay. Before the public hearing? Yeah. It would probably be, yeah, I think they would need to, right?
I think it's just
Is that implied or?
You could add before the public before the public hearing. You could integrate that.
Okay, so before the
It
public
doesn't
hearing.
have to be. It doesn't, that part doesn't have to go to the public hearing, but if you want it to, then it would be good to say that.
Okay, so you were moving that whole package, right? Okay, so seconded by Councillor Kroll. Councillor DeAndretti.
It's still not clear. I think that's the process that is a problem with the ADP, because first, I think it's important that we endorse so the developer knows. But for the public hearing, I think it's important, whatever is going to the public, it should be the already incorporated, because I know the public is gonna provide feedback, and what are we gonna say? Oh, we already took into consideration. It's confusing. So it is before.
So you're speaking in favor of the motion then, because that's what we're saying in the motion.
That wasn't clear.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All those in favor? The motion carries. Got a couple other things here. I think I'd like to look at the other planning one just while we're on it, because we've got all these papers in front of us. So 6.1.5, the OCP and zoning amendment for Lot A and C, Gibsons Way, for a commercial building fronting Gibsons Way and 172 residential apartment units. So this is another one we discussed at Committee of the Whole. And this one would be amended just to remove the line about the public hearing. Yeah, okay, moved by Councillor DeAndretti, seconded by Councillor Kroll. With that change of no public hearing, we're having a public information, we're giving it first reading, and we're having a public information session, and then we'll go to second reading after that. So, discussion on this? All those in favor? The motion carries. Okay, and now back to 6.1.3, which is a financial plan preparation. Yeah.
Sorry, before you move on, can I just mention that the public information meeting for lots A and C Gibsons Way has been scheduled for October 21st from 4 to 6 p.m. at the Gibsons and Area Rec Center.
Great. And I think maybe did councillors get that in your calendar? Yeah, I did, so. Financial plan preparation. This hasn't changed at all, has it? Okay, this was a Committee of the Whole, moved by Councillor Lumley, seconded by Councillor Kroll. All those in favor? The motion carries. And proposed amendments to business license bylaw number 666 for second, third reading. Councillor Kroll, seconded by Councillor DeAndretti. All those in favor? The motion carries. So that was actually a bylaw that came up in committee. So we already receive all our everything in the agenda. So we don't need to receive the ADP minutes. Thank you. And I think we've discussed the ADP minutes as much as we can, because they're referencing a development we've already moved forward on. So to Accessibility Advisory Committee, did you want to speak to this and put this forward, Councillor Kroll? Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor White. At the meeting we had on September 23rd, there was some discussion around the student engagement. And with respect to that, originally with the Accessibility Committee and the formation of the Regional Committee, our student on council was the youth representative to that committee. There was some discussion at the meeting that representatives from the other high schools be engaged, and what I suggested to the committee that was accepted is that the Gibson student who represents our council liaise with the other high schools to get engagement, and that the Gibson student, regardless of who that student is, automatically fills the seat on the accessibility committee. So it just eliminates the need of a name having to come up and be taken to the respective governments on the coast every time there's a change. So,
Okay, does anyone want to move that then, or are you moving it? Yeah, Councillor Kroll, seconded by Councillor D'Andretti. Any discussion? And I did confirm with Melissa that she wants to do it, so that's the important thing. All those in favor? The motion carries. And now to the development cost charge project update. And our Director of Infrastructure is not here, but should we go, oh, Councillor Lumley?
Yeah, I was gonna, I'd just like to maybe move that we defer this. I'm a little confused because I know we had the workshop with the consultant, and I know there was a number of concerns presented by council. So I don't know in this report, because I think I'd like to make, I'd like to suggest some changes to it. I don't know if we should talk about it now, but it seems like we're just moving forward with this without maybe actually, I guess if you had a workshop, I don't see the point of the workshop anymore. So, because it just seems that we're just forwarding it and recommending that it happens. So I had some concerns in the workshop, which I raised. I don't know if we could take it to a committee, maybe defer it to a committee of the whole and discuss. I'm not sure. Anyway, those are my comments.
I'll go to staff.
Yes, Mayor White, I was asked by the Director of Infrastructure to assist as I could on this. The objective here, or the request is simply to have council permission to engage in essentially an information session inviting all the key stakeholders. It does reflect very much what was discussed in the workshop, that's correct. I know the consultant did do some work, because I was involved in that, looking at realistic options or alternatives that could be suggested, and some of that's reflected in this report. But when we look out at what's going on with DCC rate updates everywhere, it's become apparent to me from other materials I've read separate of the consultant and so on, that what's being proposed is consistent. But it's starting to come into the media too, that the development community is starting to respond to this because it's such a expensive update on rates everywhere, that the opportunity to let them engage at an early opportunity and hear what they have to say essentially based on the workshop materials. The director says at that point, with that information, come back and report at committee with, this is what the development community or the people we work with had to say about all of this. And there must be notes back from the workshop too, with some comments that council made then, and combine that all with some suggestions about where to go. But I can confirm that staff are feeling that we're really missing that input from the community that have to do the developments and face these rate increases to see what they have to say. Thank you.
So I think that's a really important point. It's like if we are, as council, going to go back and reconsider this, it might be helpful to have that feedback from the development community first, before we do rather than after. I mean, I'm also kind of, makes some sense to me to, I'd also, on the other hand, it'd be nice to have it more agreeable to us before it goes to them, but we kind of have to pick one or the other. Neither's perfect.
If I could, Mayor White, on two additional things on this. I mean, first of all, it will be Urban doing a variation of the workshop to help lead a public information session so it's as useful as possible for the development community, so they can see where the logic is and how it's coming out the way it is. On the stepping away from that, so I mean, it'll be a well-run public process. Stepping back to what everyone's facing right now, there is some content that I wrote in this report, which was to say, you know, the town has a DCC program. It collects DCCs. It's doing a rate update. And this rate update is happening right after a period of a few years, 1 to 3 years, where costs in construction, depending on what the component is, has gone up 100 to 300%. When we think of it that way, it's, of course, we shouldn't be surprised that the proposed DCC rates are in the 200 to 250 plus increase range. I think the development community can see that too, even if they're not enthusiastic. And the other side of the one thing the staff have done since you last received material was to say, well, if the share the development developers would pay went down, what would be the impact on the rest of the community? And we were finding that for every 1% decrease in favor of the developers, the cost to the community is going up to 2%. And the last find we had on all of this is this, sorry, I know it's a lot, but I think it's really important. This program basically, or these rates are calculated to build out Gibsons in about 50 years at a population of about 13,000. And it calculates in all the projects you'd have to do over time to achieve that. Meanwhile, the rest of the existing community, while people are busy doing new projects and paying their share, the existing community is maintaining, with great difficulty, all the other existing infrastructure. So shifting between one or the other isn't very helpful. Thank you.
We did have this extensive discussion in our workshop, I assure you. But this is the question more about, do we want to defer this or not, which is a council decision. And
Okay.
Councillor Lumley?
Yeah, and I thank you. I totally agree with you, like all the numbers, and I get it. It's just like, maybe my question is, why did I sit down here for 2 hours and have a like, why weren't we just presented with the numbers? Like, why did we do a workshop? You know, because you're going to the, and that's fine. You could say, hey, listen, this does not reflect. I mean, certainly if you're going to have an information session, you'd have to tell developers, this doesn't reflect council's direction at all. These are just rate hikes. And what do you think? You know what I mean? Like, I think it's important that council's happy with it before you go to a stakeholder. I know what you're saying. It's like the chicken before the chicken or the egg, but I think really, you know, because I had some concerns about it. Like, we just had a housing needs report, and I seriously think that some of these rate hikes put people that want to build apartments at a disadvantage. Well, you know, those are my concerns. And my other concern in the workshop was that it's completely acceptable for somebody to pay what the DCCs are for a single family home. Like, we're trying to move away from, like, we're trying to discourage, you know, like, we have to move in a direction where we're going to encourage development in a certain area to meet the community. And I just don't think that, I don't think that just the status quo, just hiking rates, and I totally get the numbers, I just don't think that reflects on, you know, what the direction, I guess, council would want to take. I could be totally wrong, but that's the way I figured it, but.
Yeah, I remember asking those questions at the workshop as well about those very things, and it was clear from the answers that there was some subjectivity about what the consultant considered to be fair to certain properties. But Councillor Thompson next.
Thank you. Bear with me, because this is my first time with DCCs, and I know you've all sort of went through this previously. But there's ancillary questions that pertain to this that I think are along the lines of what you're talking about, which is the process in which developers would be required to pay those DCCs. Like, have we determined, is that immediate? Is that over a period of a time? And then also DCC credits and how they work. Is this already determined information within that process?
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, through Mayor White. So there are existing DCC rates, and developers are paying those. Once bylaw was adopted with updated rates, starting that date, all the applications in process would have a year to complete their applications. And as long as they achieve that, they get the old rates. Once it's been adopted, all the new applications open are, the new rates are applicable to. So that's how administratively the transition is done.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to add to that, through the mayor, the DCC rates are charged at time of subdivision approval. So that's where it's triggered, or at time of building permit issuance. So they'd have to pay at that point. And I also wanted to let you know that Jessica Wang from Urban Systems is online if you have more questions to her.
Councillor Andretti.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to refer to the staff report that they give the other option, right? The public pays for development. And I think this is a question that we have to discuss as well. So, well, it's here, right? That every resident pays for development. It's here in the staff report. So they even give an example of, I mean, we don't have to discuss today. What I'm saying is there's all this questioning. I support getting this report to the building community and get their feedback. But there's a reality that we all facing, right? After COVID, every salary, every cost of everything is increasing. And what I don't want to see, it's that every resident has to pay for the development, because we already pay a lot. So this has to be distributed. And obviously developers would transfer whatever is the added cost to the price of the unit. So.
I appreciate Councillor through you, Mayor White. I appreciate Councillor Lumley's concerns, but I think the Director of Infrastructure would like to, get to have another council workshop and then go out to public engagement is going to drag this out beyond the fourth quarter of this year. So I would like to move the recommendation in 7.2.
Okay.
No,
Yeah, we're aren't getting seconders very quickly today. Yeah, but we got one now. Councillor DeAndretti. Discussion on this motion? Councillor Thompson?
So are you suggesting then that it goes out, comes back to council, and then it goes back out to our stakeholders a second time?
These are, who are the stakeholders? Sorry.
Our community, sorry, not stakeholders. The development community.
A second time.
Well, if we're talking about, we're going to send it out right now, if that's what's being suggested and was seconded, then it comes back, council discusses it again, we reframe it, and then it would go back to the development community to be discussed based on what council's determined?
There was another email, thank you. Yeah.
So Mayor White, there in the report, the recommendations have two parts. The first one is that staff be directed to host a stakeholder information session on these proposed DCC rates. The second part is in error and replaced by that one, which just essentially says come back with what you've got and anything else you did on this to discuss it with council at a committee before you update any bylaws or do anything else. If that goes well, then you can proceed on to drafting your bylaws. But
you.
that's the next stop, and it's unclear what will happen at that point.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Right. Yeah, this is really jumping the gun. That was a good correction and good catch, yeah. So I assumed that this would have been this version. So can we amend this motion to it, so what should be written there in the second part is, and that staff prepare a report summarizing the feedback from the stakeholder engagement and providing recommendations for updates to the DCC bylaw 1218 to be presented to committee in Q4 2024. Yeah. Okay, so that amendment is moved by Councillor Cole, seconded by Councillor DeAndrade. All those in favor of the amendment? That carries. Now we have an amended motion. Any discussion on this? Any further discussion? All those in favor of the amended motion? That carries. Okay, thanks. And yeah, now I can understand your concern even more, Councillor Lundy, that I see that original draft was to pass 3 readings. I wasn't ready for that, that's for sure. I wasn't expecting that. So I appreciate you flagging that. 7.3, Director of Planning and Development Services, boundary expansion.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have a slide presentation, a short one. Once it's up, I'll start. There we go. Okay, so there's 2 maps here showing the location of the properties that have requested to be brought into the town of Gibsons boundary. So there's 4 properties, 2 on Pratt Road and 2 on Huff Road. So you can see in this map, the black dotted line is the town's boundary. And these 4 properties are currently in the Sunshine Coast Regional District. These property owners have requested to move into the town of Gibsons to access services, so water, sanitary, and sewer specifically, to develop the properties to a higher potential. This is the other property, the 5th one, and this is Lot 6 Gower Point Road. As with the first 4 properties, they also want to have access to services, to municipal services. Council has a policy, 3.1, that was written in 1990, and it essentially says that any property can apply to be included in the town. It has to be adjacent to the boundary, and it can't have capital costs, and the zoning must be reasonable. So these reports were prepared. In September 2023, Council passed these resolutions to work with Urban Systems to look at implications for the boundary expansion. So the full reports are enclosed with the agenda package, and they break down the site location, legal overview, zoning and land use considerations, property tax and servicing implications, infrastructure overview, and then stakeholder feedback. I didn't go into all the details because it's all in the reports, but I just wanted to highlight some of the stakeholder feedback because this will be part of the next step in the process. So the stakeholder feedback to date from the SCRD, they said that servicing arrangements would need to be established. So the garbage and organics pickup, the water, they'd have to be transferred from the SCRD to the town of Gibsons if they moved in. The Ministry of Transportation indicated that they would prefer handing the roads over to the town, the roads fronting the length of the properties. And they would also need to consider access and drainage requirements and how to change the jurisdiction from provincial to municipal. Overall, I'll go over this part. Sorry, the results of the reports, basically, in terms of the impacts to the town, we haven't seen any significant impacts that were identified for the boundary expansion. The costs identified would be through updating the zoning and OCP with new information, transferring the services, the elector approval process. The greatest cost to the town would be the ongoing road maintenance if the roads become the town's jurisdiction. And then once developed, then the town would collect more property taxes for all those 5 properties. The impact to the property owner is that they would have higher taxes and they would have services and development potential. This slide goes over the provincial boundary expansion process. So there's 6 steps in the process. This was from a report written in 2010, I believe. But right now we're at the end of step 2. So we've got these reports which could be submitted to the province. And after the province reviews the application, or the applications for the boundary expansion, they would require a duty to consult with Indigenous nations, and the ministry will let us know what they've received, like any feedback they've received. This step can take up to a year if all goes well, and then at that point, the minister would basically give the town permission to proceed to the elector approval process. Then at that point, the town would hold an AAP or a referendum to get feedback from the community on whether to support this. And then after that, council would decide whether to proceed to steps 5 and 6. So there's some options in the report. Council may direct staff to step 3, to proceed to step 3, to begin the provincial review process, or council can abandon the boundary expansion requests. That's it for my presentation. Thank you.
Councillor D'Andretti?
Thank you. I think my question regards the road, because I know roads can be a big expense, but it would be nice to have an idea, right? Because maybe in the big picture is kind of insignificant and we will benefit. Even going to like a AAP. So, but I know the director is not here, but is there any idea of this cost?
Yeah, just to go through, having like some kind of cost benefit analysis of that of the whole thing would be, but how could we? What would be a fair way to do that too? Is that something that we would have to take on ourselves, or could that be part of this work we're getting through urban when we go through these processes?
Thank you, Mayor. So what we would do at this point, the feedback about the roads is preliminary from the Ministry of Transportation. When the province goes through their process, they get formal comments from the ministry and the SCRD and Agricultural Land Commission and Front Counter BC potentially, and the nations. And then they would compile that and give that to the town. At that point, we could do a cost benefit analysis based on the information we have, and bring that back to council for the second consideration to move it forward again.
Actually, Councillor Lumley had his hand up right at the beginning, didn't you? Okay, sorry I missed you. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a few questions, I guess, through the mayor. I did notice that one of these properties, they cleared every single tree off it recently. I guess they're getting ready to join the town of Gibsons, and they don't have to pull a tree permit. That's one thing, but I've clearly, I don't know if this is possible. Like, I have a few concerns, but I think clearly, you know, it's obvious from the report and everything else that they fully plan on developing these properties, and they can't do that if they remain in the regional district. They can only put one home on them. So, I mean, I get there's an increase in taxes and so on and so forth, and, I mean, the increase with the services and stuff isn't that great amount. I bet you the staff time preparing these reports and trying to bring these people into Gibsons would way outdo any of the tax increases, I would almost say, in the first couple of years. But I guess my question is that why, like, can the town, like, so the town's gonna go through this process, and sure, I guess we'll collect taxes in the long run if they develop the properties, and if we agree to whatever their development plans are. But, I mean, it's almost like you should say, okay, like, we can't get anything, like, I'd almost wanna say, hey, if you wanna join the town of Gibsons, you're gonna have to, like, give us something, like, pay up, like, I don't know, I mean, no, you know what I'm saying, right? It's like, I don't know, it just seems like, yeah, it seems like, I feel like I'm being used. Yeah, anyway, it's clear, and the one thing too is I was confused with was, the property assessments on the graph, on the numbers, and I was trying to scroll through there, but now, the mayor's, there's BC assessments, it seems like the numbers are kind of ridiculous as far as the taxes go, like, I don't know, did anybody else not find that? Like the increase in value for the property based on the home, or assumingly that there's a one home, it went to $470,000. Like, I don't know who buys a home now these days for $470,000. So I was a bit confused on the numbers, that's all. And they were low to begin with. It was like 100 or close to 200,000, and then it went to 4 something. Anyway, I was just confused at those, the BC assessments, how they got those figures, that's all.
Those were in the staff report?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
Urban systems, yeah.
okay. Councillor Kroll?
I was just curious with respect to the roads, is it both Pratt Road and Huff Road that the town would be assuming?
So, through the mayor, the preliminary comments were that the ministry would prefer to hand over the roads. Realistically, I don't know how that would work on Pratt Road because most of it is the ministry. Huff Road is all the town of Gibson, so that would make more sense. And then Gower Point Road is questionable because that is also mostly ministry owned.
Well, we might prefer it another way. I mean, it makes sense that they'd prefer it, but yeah, that doesn't mean that it will happen. Councillor DeAndrade?
I'll move option 1.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Kroll. Any discussion on that? All those in favor? All those opposed? That carries. Now, another piece on this, we discussed at agenda setting is just the challenge of this process and the concern that, I mean, there have been further inquiries about this. And does council want to, and maybe we need staff to just explore this a little more, I don't know, but do we want to set up a process? It sounds like maybe, do we want to set up a process to say, to not necessarily encourage, but to say that if properties are interested, here's a way to do it, or maybe set a date so that you'd have a cluster all at once rather than because these reports that are having to be done, including if we had to do a cost benefit analysis of a road, it doesn't just doing property by property by property. It doesn't allow for that, and it makes it very inconvenient. And then there's this cumbersome process that we're having to do for these ones. I don't want to be in a position where we're doing that like every 3 months. Councillor Lumley raised some points about, just the speculation of why properties might be interested in this. And I mean, a big one is water. I think that's got to be the biggest one. and just the lack of water security. Councillor Lumley.
And then multiply that by the amount of the development, right? Like, who's going to buy into a development in an area that has no water or goes into a drought every time? I mean, obviously, somebody going to have the security to buy into a development with water, but, and my other point, which is on the back of your point, Mayor, is that we had discussed, well, maybe I shouldn't say it in an open meeting, but some ways of protecting our watersheds, but yeah, maybe I can't say that right now. Okay.
I'm not sure where you were going with that, Councillor Lumley, but I mean, we have, the town has, for a number of years, kind of been proposing to the SCRD water governance, looking at regional water. Most recently, very publicly, there was a proposal to kind of share water more on a watershed basis in the Mount Elphinstone area, and yeah, I mean, it was reported what kind of response we got to that. So hence you're getting people from areas, neighboring areas, and potential people wanting to look at these properties in neighboring areas, saying they want secure water, which is reasonable.
I agree with you saying on a case-by-case basis, it'd be very expensive and stuff, but I think we talked about expanding the boundary, like doing a boundary expansion that would encompass our watershed area. Like, I mean, if you're gonna, like you say, if people are gonna start handpicking people to share, like, I guess the benefits of this, of the, you know, I guess the way that the intelligence and the foresight that Gibsons curates their resources, then why wouldn't we expand our boundary to encompass our watershed area, you know? Anyway, that was my question.
Okay, Councillor D'Andrade?
Just a clarification, because the point Councillor Lumley made makes sense, but my understanding is that the watershed is Crown land. Would it be a completely different process, or do you understand? I mean, we cannot, it's almost like one thing is when people want to join the town and they have the right, and we go through this process that we are going right now. Another one is we propose the ministry that we want to, because the big part of our watershed, it's not in private land, as far as I understand.
I don't think that's really what we're talking about. I mean, there's the watershed, if you're talking about the Mount Elphinstone itself, we're talking about like the whole watershed area, including the developed areas, the land that watershed feeds, going all the way source to sea, you know? We're looking at the source to sea.
Okay. All these areas.
Yeah, all there are maps on the wall, yeah. Outlook, yeah. Okay, well, that's a broader conversation, I think, if it is broader than just the idea of maybe having a process for property by property, so. We'll see how this one goes, but I think in future, I mean, it could be cumbersome if we're approaching them one by one, or even in clusters of 2 or 3, if they're, because this is a lot, even just once going to staff.
Just to flag the policy, so that we do have that 1990 policy, and that could be something to look at if you wanted to look at a date, or say, you know, if you want to apply, you have to apply by this time, this day every year, or something just to streamline them if they do come in.
Yeah, updating a policy from 1990 is never a bad idea. So that's a good start. Okay. Council reports. Thank you, Councillor D'Andrade, for your report. Anyone have any questions on the report? We've got more extensive notes being prepared. Thanks Heidi for doing that for UBCM, which well, we will also share when those are ready. More extensive notes about the minister meetings in particular, which we'll get out there. And now we've got a motion to close, I think. under sections 1A, 1C, 1K, 1M, and 2D of the community charter. And all those sections are listed on the agenda. Councillor Kroll and Councillor DeAndrade, all those in favor? The motion carries to close the meeting.